In the third year of the thrashing, a single human freighter logged 411 captures across both stellar seas. I have seen the figure disputed. I have seen it rounded down by historians who could not bear it and rounded up by balladeers who never understood it. I have not seen it beaten. 411 hulls, taken across two oceans of stars, by one ship and the woman who renamed it. Not the raiders your hatchlings sing about. Not the warlord of the ash reefs with the burning crest, who took perhaps 20 hulls and lost his head to a customs cutter. Not the verge corsair the dramatists love, all teeth and screaming, who is remembered chiefly because he died loudly. Those were costumes. The woman I am speaking of wore a stolen red coat and drank a hot infusion of dried leaves on the bridge of her ship, and she dismantled the most profitable trade corridor in this arm of the galaxy, while the conquered navy sent squadron after squadron into the dark to find her. Her name was Edith Crane. The survivors who served under her called her the quiet captain, which tells you they did not know her well or knew her too well. The ship she commanded, a vessel she renamed 4 separate times, always to the same name, was called the Royal Fortune, and I am the underwriter who priced the risk of meeting her. I priced it badly. I priced it so badly that the guild I served for 900 standard cycles no longer exists, and I sit here in retirement on a pension paid in a currency 3 governments ago, telling you the truth that the textbooks could not afford to print. So how did a press-ganged human navigator, a woman who never wanted the life and said so to the raider's face, become the most successful pirate 2 oceans of stars have ever recorded? To understand that, you must first understand the map, not the sentimental map, the actuarial one. Picture the thrashing lanes as they were before Crane, 2 great pools of stars joined by a single navigable throat. On the inward side, the Kawad Verge, fortified, ancient, fat with the wealth of 100 settled systems and patrolled by the chartered warships of the conquered. On the outward side, the ash reefs, lawless, scattered, rich in raw ore and rarer things, where no law reached that a fast ship could not outrun, and strung between them through the throat the freight. Everything moved through the throat. Manufactured goods sailed outward from the verge to be traded in the reefs. Ore and salvage and contraband sailed inward to feed the foundries of the core, and the great convoys of the chartered companies hauled the truly valuable cargo, refined metals, sealed pharmaceutical stock, indentured laborers bonded to their debts, back and forth along the only road there was. Every leg of that road was money, staggering, civilization-shaping money. My guild insured nearly a third of it, and in the good years we slept soundly because the road was long and the predators were small. But every leg of that road was also exposed. The freighters were slow because slow ships carry more. They were lightly armed because guns are mass and mass is profit foregone. And they were crewed by beings who were paid almost nothing and owed nothing in return, which meant that when a raider came alongside, the crew very rarely chose to die for a cargo that was not theirs. We knew all of this. We priced all of this. We had a column in the ledger for piracy the way a coastal people has a column for storms, a known loss, a manageable loss, a loss you simply build into the premium. The thrashing lanes were Edith Crane's hunting ground for 3 years, and she taught my entire profession that there is a difference between a storm you can price and a storm that learns. But before she was the storm, she was the cargo. She began on that road as freight, not as the thing that took it. She was born, by the few records that survive, on a tidally locked mining world in the outer reefs, a place where one face burned and one face froze, and the people lived in the narrow ring between, hauling ore for a company that owned the air they breathed. Humans, I have come to learn, are not born equal in their own estimation. Crane was born into the bottom of a ledger, indentured before she could walk, and she understood from the start that there were exactly 2 roads off that world. You could work the mines until your lungs gave out and die owing more than you earned. Or you could go to the lanes and hope the dark did not kill you before you bought your way free. She chose the lanes, By her middle years, she was an experienced navigator, competent enough, by the testimony of those who flew with her, to hold a third officer's berth aboard a bonded labor hauler called the Constance. It was filthy work. The bonded labor trade was the worst leg of the worst road, a floating debtor's prison hauling beings who had signed away their own bodies to clear a family's account. But it paid. And Crane was good at the dark, good at reading a drift current, good at keeping her mouth shut while younger officers with company connections were promoted over her head. She was, in short, exactly the kind of being the legitimate world manufactures by the thousand and then is astonished to lose. Loyal because loyalty was the only asset she had. Patient because she had no other choice. And entirely, quietly aware that 20 years of service would buy her a pauper's berth on a station dock, and not one word of thanks. Then the raiders came. A cutter under a man named Solomon Reyes, running no transponder, swept the Constance in the dark beyond a reef where the convoy escort had no jurisdiction. Reyes was a human raider of some local reputation, more lucky than careful, and he took the hauler cleanly. He gave Crane the offer that every captured spacer in those lanes received, the offer that is older than my species' written law: join us, or we leave you here with nothing. By the surviving accounts, Crane did not leap. She told Reyes to his face that what he did was a low and ugly trade, and she meant it. But she also did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was not close. The legitimate fleets treated her as a disposable line in a ledger, and I say this as the being who wrote such lines. The raiders, for all their squalor, voted on their captains. They split the take in equal shares. They had written articles, signed by every hand, that guaranteed each one a voice and a portion. It was not freedom in any clean sense, but measured against the bonded haulers, it was the closest thing to a fair contract in that entire dark. She joined, she is reported to have said, not out of hunger for the life, but out of mathematics. I have thought about that sentence for 30 cycles. My whole profession is mathematics, and it never once occurred to us to ask what the cargo's mathematics looked like from the inside. Solomon Reyes was a capable raider and a reckless one, and the second quality killed him before the first could save him. 6 weeks after Crane signed his articles, 6 weeks, he attempted a boarding he had been explicitly warned against a verge revenue station that was better defended than his scouts had reported. He went across with the first wave to prove something to a crew that had not asked him to prove anything. He was cut down in the lock. He died in vacuum within sight of his own ship, and the boarding collapsed, and suddenly a crew of frightened raiders was drifting beside a hostile station, with the captain who had organized their lives reduced to a frozen shape against the hull. They needed a new captain immediately. There is no slower death in the dark than a leaderless crew, and the vote when it came went against every reasonable expectation, including by every account her own. They chose the quiet navigator, the one who had been aboard 6 weeks, the one who did not drink the smuggled liquor, did not brawl in the hold, did not raise her voice. Why? Because in 6 weeks the crew had noticed what the legitimate fleets had spent 20 years failing to notice. When Reyes wanted a heading, Crane already had it. When the drives faltered in a reef storm, Crane stayed at the board and the others ran. When 2 men were ready to kill each other over a card debt, it was Crane's flat voice that ended it. One of the hands, by a much-repeated account, argued the vote in a single sentence. If they were going to be hunted to death anyway, better to be led by a being with a cold head than one with a hot one. She accepted the captaincy with a line that would define the next 3 years. Since she had already dipped her hands in the dark, she said, more or less, the accounts vary, it was better to command than to be commanded, and far better to set the articles than to merely sign them. Her first act as captain was not flight, it was return. She turned the cutter back toward the very station that had killed Reyes. And she finished the raid he had botched, and she did it with a precision he had never possessed, striking the supply vaults rather than the guns, taking what moved and burning what did not, and leaving before the station could call for an escort. The message to her own crew was as clear as the message to the verge. This captain calculated. This captain did not waste men to prove a point, and this captain did not forget a debt in either direction. Then she pointed her ship toward the throat, and toward the richest road there was. She crossed into the Corward Verge in the second quarter of that first year, into waters no sane reef's raider entered, and she did the single thing that taught me she was not an ordinary loss on my ledger. She found a convoy. 41 chartered freighters, holding station off a Verge anchorage, waiting on a Concord escort squadron that was running late. 41 hulls, fat with refined metal and sealed cargo, and the warships that should have been guarding them were still hours out. Any raider with sense would have seen 41 ships and fled. The escort was coming. The risk was absurd. Crane sailed straight into the middle of them. And then, this is the part my profession never understood about her, she did not attack 41 ships. She was bold, not stupid. She put the Royal Fortune alongside the single richest hull in the cluster, a deep-core hauler carrying refined ore, sealed pharmaceutical stock, and a strongbox of 40,000 Verge sovereigns, and she took it. Only that one. She transferred what she wanted, left the rest untouched and gaping, and was through the throat and gone before the escort squadron's lead ship cleared the anchorage. 41 ships in the cluster. She robbed the one that mattered, and she vanished, and the convoy commander was reduced to writing a report explaining how he had lost a fortune from the center of his own formation without firing a shot. That was the pattern, whole and complete, in her first major raid. Speed, precision, an almost insulting economy. She did not want battles. She wanted to appear, take the one thing worth taking, and be elsewhere before the dark could organize a response. My guild filed the loss under convoy escort failure and raised the premium on that route by a small fraction because we still believed we were dealing with a storm. And then she got the ship that would make the pattern unbeatable. Some weeks later, she ambushed a Concord patrol cutter, a fast 40-gun vessel built for exactly the kind of pursuit she intended never to lose, and she took it, and she gutted its registry, and she renamed it. She named it the Royal Fortune. The name was a deliberate insult, and every captain in the Verge understood it, because the chartered companies sailed under a royal grant and called their wealth the royal account. Crane's message, painted across a stolen Concord hull, was that the true royal fortune belonged to whoever was bold enough to take it. But the ship was never the weapon. I want to be very precise about this, because it is the thing the dramatists always get wrong and the thing that ruined me. The weapon was the articles. Crane wrote a code, and every hand who joined her signed it before they were given a berth, and the code was extraordinary for that dark. Every hand received an equal share of fresh plunder and provisions. Every hand received a vote in the affairs of the moment. Disputes were settled at anchor and never underway. Drives and weapons were kept ready or you forfeited your share. Lights low after the rest bell. No fighting in the hold. And this is the detail I could never reconcile. The ship's 2 musicians were excused from labor on every 7th rest cycle by written guarantee, because a crew that cannot rest cannot fight. She did not write these articles out of sentiment. She wrote them because she understood a thing my entire industry had priced wrong. A crew that believes the contract is fair fights as if the ship were its own. A crew with clear rules has fewer knives in the dark. A disciplined 100 can take a careless 1,000. The Royal Fortune was not a raider. It was a fair company that happened to be armed, and every hand aboard it was a part owner of every hull they took. And the captain of that company was, by every surviving account, an anomaly among raiders. In a dark where corsairs were defined by their drinking and their noise, Crane drank no liquor at all. She drank a hot infusion of dried leaves tea, the humans call it, brewed precisely, taken alone on the bridge before every action, in a battered metal cup she had carried since the bonded haulers. She dressed, by contrast, like a sovereign, a crimson coat lifted from a Verge governor's yacht, and around her neck a cross of worked gold and cut diamond that she had taken from the same prize, the only piece of plunder she was ever known to keep for herself. Her crew said she looked less like a pirate than like a creditor come to collect. which, I have come to think, is exactly what she was. By the second year of the thrashing, the numbers on my ledger had stopped behaving like numbers. Premiums on the throat root, which my guild had held steady for 900 cycles, doubled, then doubled again, then could not be priced at all, because to price a risk you must first be able to predict it, and Edith Crane was no longer predictable. She was capturing hulls at a rate that no raider in recorded history had approached, better than 2 a week, sustained, across both seas. She would savage the reefs for a quarter, and the moment the Conquered redeployed warships to the reefs, she was already through the throat and gutting convoys in the Verge, 3,000 light-years away, and a month ahead of the dispatches. She struck a Verge fishing fleet anchorage and took 22 hulls in a single sweep, and the colonial governor sent a panicked appeal to the Corps begging for protection that the Corps could not spare. 2 chartered companies rerouted their entire trade away from the throat rather than meet her. A third simply stopped declaring its losses to us, because the losses had become embarrassing. The Conquered Navy had no idea how to stop her, and the reason was geometric. The Dark is enormous. Even with a squadron on every named route, finding one ship in that volume was a search for a single grain in a desert of grains, and Crane made it worse by never resting in one place long enough to be found. By the time the Navy concentrated, she had dispersed. By the time they dispersed to chase, she had concentrated somewhere else entirely. One of the most powerful navies in the settled galaxy was being made to look foolish by a reef's orphan in a stolen coat who would not even drink. I confess that in the guild strategy sessions, the matter of the tea became something close to an obsession, and I was the worst of us. We had files. We had a behavioral model of the typical raider captain, his vices, his greed, his appetites, the predictable points at which he would overreach for liquor or for spectacle, the moments of weakness an underwriter could quietly price into the survival curve. Crane had no such point. She took no spectacle. She kept no plunder but one cross. And she drank a hot infusion of dried leaves, alone before every action, and went sober into a dark that every other raider entered drunk. I built model after model trying to account for the tea, trying to find the vice that the leaves concealed, the weakness the cup implied. There was none. The leaves were simply leaves. The discipline was simply discipline, and a profession built on the certainty that everything has a price stared at a battered metal cup and could not put a number on it. But power, even hers, breeds a particular kind of rot. By the close of that second year, Crane was making the small errors that the truly disciplined make only when nothing has gone wrong for too long. She let her crew swell past 200, and the articles that had been iron law among 20 hands frayed among 200, because you cannot personally enforce a contract you can no longer personally watch. She let the winds come too easily, and ease is the slowest poison there is. And she lingered, just a little too long, in waters she had every reason to leave. She had beaten the storm model so completely that she forgot the dark might one day send something that was not a storm. It was about to. The Conquered, at last, did the one intelligent thing it had not yet tried. It stopped sending squadrons to chase her, and it gave the problem to a single mind. His name was Vesh Corlin, a Logothete admiral of the line, and he was not a brute. I have read his dispatches. They were entered into the tribunal record, and I have read them more times than is healthy. He was a patient being, a reader of patterns, the kind of officer my own profession would have hired in an instant. He was given 2 warships, a heavy of 60 guns and a consort of 50, and a single written order: find the human and end her, by whatever means the dark required. Corlin understood at once the thing every commander before him had failed to grasp, and he wrote it plainly in his first dispatch. You cannot catch this captain in open space. She is faster than your fastest, more sudden than your readiness, and far cleverer than your patience. You will never run her down, therefore you do not chase her. You determine where she must go, and you are there before her, and you wait. So he studied her the way I should have studied her, the way none of us did until it was too late to matter. And he found the one thing she could not escape, not greed, because she had none, not vice, because she had none, but physics. Every ship, however fast, accumulates fouling. The drives clog. The hull skin pits and drags. And sooner or later, every raider must halt in some quiet reef, vent the drives, scour the hull, and refuel. And while she is doing it, she cannot run, and she cannot fight. And for a span of hours, the most feared ship in two oceans is as helpless as the cargo it once was. Corlin identified the reef she always returned to for her scouring, a sheltered, resource-rich pocket in the outer ash reefs, far from any law, where she had hailed the Royal Fortune to clean its hull a dozen times before. He did not announce himself. He did not send a squadron. He took his two ships to that reef, and he shut down his transponders, and he waited in the dark with the patience of a being who has finally understood his prey. He waited where the storm would have to make landfall. And Edith Crane, 3,000 light-years away and certain of her own legend, set her heading for home. Here is the thing that the tribunal record makes plain and that no balladeer will ever sing because it ruins the song. We had her wrong. Corlin had her half wrong, and the half he had right was the half that killed her by the purest accident of timing. Because the captured logs of the Royal Fortune, entered into evidence after the end, told a story none of us had been clever enough to read while she lived. We had all believed the Navy, my guild, every governor on the route that Edith Crane was hunting cargo, 411 hulls. What else could she be hunting? But the logs showed something colder and stranger. Her raids were not chosen for their wealth. They were chosen for their geometry. Again and again she had struck targets of middling value at the precise edge of a patrol's coverage, not to take the cargo but to clock the response. How long until the escort turned? How fast the dispatch reached the core, where the squadrons would concentrate, and how long they would take to disperse? She was not robbing the trade. She was mapping the Navy's reflexes, hull by hull, raid by raid, building in 3 years an actuarial model of the Concord's own predictability that was more accurate than anything my guild ever produced. The cargo was the cover. The plan, the logs suggest, was a single coordinated strike through the throat that would have closed the route to chartered trade for a generation, a thing she was perhaps one season from attempting. I think about that often. We hunted a thief. She was an underwriter of a kind, pricing the risk of the Navy itself, and she had nearly finished her model when physics caught her where strategy never could. The most disciplined being in that dark was undone not by an enemy who understood her, but by a barnacle on a hull and a crew that, for one fatal night, forgot the articles she had written. Because when Corlin finally found her, she was mid-scour at the reef, the Royal Fortune drifting half-vented and helpless, exactly as he had calculated. And her crew, who had taken a fat prize the night before, were slack and loud, and many of them still drunk on liquor her own code forbade, the discipline of 20 hands lost among 200 at the worst possible hour. Corlin did not even attack the whole fleet. He was as economical as she had ever been. He showed only one ship, his consort, running false merchant colors past the mouth of the reef like easy prey, and the Royal Fortune's consort vessel, under a first officer named Holly's Pike, took the bait. Pike gave chase, his crew stumbling drunk to the guns around the curve of the reef and out of sight of Crane entirely. Their Corlin turned, and the 50-gun warship opened on Pike's hungover crew, and it was vicious and it was short. Pike's ship was dismasted of its drive vanes and gutted. Pike himself, badly wounded, is reported to have asked his own crew to space him rather than be taken. They refused, and the survivors struck their colors. Corlin had destroyed a third of her fleet, and Edith Crane, still venting her drives in the reef, did not yet know it had happened. He came back for the Royal Fortune 3 days later, in the dim light of a reef dawn, with the 60-gun heavy and a haze of dust between the ships. Crane had noted that Pike's consort had not returned, but she was not yet alarmed. Ships were separated all the time, chasing a prize or riding out a storm. She expected Pike within the week. Then a single sail showed through the dust, running merchant colors, no Navy markings, alone. And Edith Crane, disciplined in all things but this one, betrayed at the last by the very reputation she had built, made the only careless decision of her career. She trusted that her legend would do the work. She believed that any hull foolish enough to wander into her reef would strike its colors at the sight of the royal fortune, as so many hundreds had. She decided to engage. It was the conquered heavy, 60 guns, and a commander who had spent a year learning her. She dressed for it as she always did. The crimson coat, the gold and diamond cross, the battered cup drained and set aside. By the accounts of the survivors, she looked like a woman dressing for a coronation, not a battle, but her crew was in no state to match her. Like pikes, many of them were still slow with the previous night's drink, the articles broken at the hour they mattered most, and Crane, by one report, was coldly furious in the moments before the fighting, because her own code had failed at the one moment it existed to prevent. But there was no time to fix what 200 easy victories had loosened. Even then, even drunk and outgunned, she nearly escaped. She attempted the maneuver that had carried her clear 100 times, to drive the royal fortune hard across the bow of the heavy, take one broadside and break for open dark where her speed would simply leave Corlin behind. If she cleared his guns and reached open space, no ship in 2 oceans could have caught her, and she knew it. It almost worked. She stood at the command board, calling the burn herself, the great stolen warship gathering way under a slack crew, and for a span of seconds the angle was hers. Then the heavy fired a raking burst of close-spread shot, the kind meant not to break a hull but to sweep a deck of its crew, and a cluster of it caught Edith Crane across the throat where she stood at the board. She died, by every account, almost at once, folding forward over the very console from which she had commanded the most feared ship in the dark. Her crew saw her fall, and here the survivors are united, across every separate testimony, on a single act. Crane had told them more than once that if she died under way she would not be taken, in body or in legend, by the conquered. So in the middle of the fight, with the heavy still firing, a handful of them carried her, still in the crimson coat, the diamond cross still at her throat, to the nearest lock, and they cast her out into the dark of the reef she had returned to a dozen times, and they honored the only thing she had ever asked for herself. Without her, the fight came apart in less than an hour. The helm officer was too drunk to hold a heading. The Royal Fortune drifted into the Heavy's line of fire and stayed there, taking the broadside she would never have allowed. By the time it ended, the most feared ship in 2 oceans was a drifting wreck, and 152 of her crew were prisoners of a single patient admiral who had simply refused to chase her. They were taken to a conquered holdfast at the edge of the verge, and there the largest raider tribunal in recorded history was held. 152 souls. 52 of them were condemned and hanged in the old human fashion the conquered permitted for the occasion. The rest were sentenced to the labor pits of a core moon, a fate that several of the condemned were said to envy the gallows for. The Royal Fortune was stripped of its guns and its gold, and the diamond cross was never recovered, having gone into the dark with the body of the only being who ever owned it. The hull was left to drift in a verge-impound yard until it rotted out of the registry, and the death of Edith Crane is marked, by every serious historian of the period, as the precise end of the lawless age of the thrashing lanes. There were raiders after her, of course. There are raiders today, but the age of one captain in a fast ship challenging an entire civilization on the open dark, that age died at the reef with her, and the trade routes she had broken heeled over as though she had never been, and the premiums my guild had been forced to abandon crept slowly back to their old, comfortable, predictable numbers. The storm had passed. We told ourselves it had merely been a storm. And here is the irony I have carried for 30 cycles, the one that the textbooks could not afford and the balladeers refused to learn. The most successful raider in the history of 2 oceans, a being who took more hulls than every corsair your hatchlings sing about, combined and trebled, is a footnote. The warlord with the burning crest who took 20 ships has statues. The screaming corsair who died loudly has songs. Edith Crane, who took 411, who broke the throat of the richest trade road in this arm of the galaxy, who nearly priced the conquered navy out of its own confidence. Edith Crane has a tribunal record and a line in a tariff history that almost no one reads. Part of the reason is simple. She does not fit the picture. She did not drink. She did not swagger. She kept no hoard and burned no cities for spectacle. She was methodical, disciplined, and quiet, and she ran her ship not like a den of thieves but like a fair company in which every hand was an owner, and a fair company is not a song. A madwoman with a burning crest is a song. A creditor in a red coat with a cup of tea is a lesson, and beings do not build statues to lessons. But it was the lesson, in the end, that ruined me, and it is the lesson I owe you before I am done. My profession was built on a single article of faith, that everything has a price, and that what can be priced can be insured against, and that a civilization which prices its risks correctly cannot be brought down by any storm. Edith Crane disproved all three with one stolen warship and a signed code of articles. We could price her ships. We could price her cargo, her routes. Even at the last, her hulls need to be scoured. We could not price the thing that made her, the fact that she took 200 disposable beings whom the legitimate world had written off as line items, and made each of them a part-owner of the venture, and so they fought for her as no paid crew has ever fought for anyone. We had a column for greed. We had no column for fairness, because we had never once imagined it could be a weapon. That was the whole of it. A civilization that treats its people as costs to be minimized will always, in the end, be beaten by one that turns its people into stakeholders, because the first buys obedience and the second earns belief, and belief is the one asset that does not appear on any ledger I was ever trained to read. We hunted her as a thief. We should have studied her as a doctrine. Her body was never recovered. The diamond cross was never found. And the name Royal Fortune drifted out of the registry and into the dark, attached now to nothing but the ghost of a reef's orphan who never wanted the life, who joined out of arithmetic and died out of one night's broken discipline, and who proved for 3 impossible years that you cannot insure against the unpriced. I priced everything in that dark but her. I am told that is why I am still here, retired and ruined, telling you this instead of sleeping soundly on a pension that no longer exists. If there is a lesson in that too, I leave it to you. I have run out of columns for it.